Hello, it's Dr. Greg again with a video that I wanted to have done for a long time, and I find this is actually going to be an important video. My whole goal with healthcare and with education is for people to take responsibility for their own healthcare and to understand the myriad of research and all the ideas that are out there that affect us, everything from vitamin D levels, which I just started talking about, to the kind of exercises that can be beneficial, to seeing your doctor, all that kind of stuff. And what I find is that the volume of research that is published every single day makes it almost impossible for individuals to fully understand what to do for their health. I mean, we're very confused. So what do? We do about common sense. We look at the past. How did our ancestors live? What did they eat? All those types of things which could have an impact on us. What are we doing now that our ancestors didn't do in the past? And why are we having so many illnesses from, all sorts of hip discomfort, chronic low back pain, heart disease, diabetes? All these things are sort of at an epidemic level. That why is that happening to us? So what I want to do today is I want to talk about research, and I want to talk about research papers and actually how to approach them, how to read them, how to look at them. So right now you can get most research papers that are published on what's called PubMed, and they can be read, but not the entire research, just the what we call the abstract or the summary. You can't even get a conclusion, but what you can get is the abstract, which sort of has a conclusion in it, and then you can get a list of all the research that the researchers used for that particular research to be inspired to do that particular research. Those elements are very important. So what I wanted to do is two things today. I wanted to talk about what's called the scientific method, and then just go over one abstract on vitamin D and how it relates to breast cancer. And just going to read it right off the computer on how they wrote it and try and explain it. So first off, I'm going to read to you the 6 steps of the scientific method. The scientific method is something that scientists use for research, and it's a standard so that when they do this research, they follow the scientific method so it gets published, and the published paper that they create is reviewed, and then it is determined whether it is proper scientific method or just trash. All right, so here we go. So the scientific method has 6 steps. The first step is to define a purpose. In other words, why are you going to look at this? So for the paper that the abstract that I'm going to read is, does vitamin D deficiency have an impact, or is it correlated, or is it related to breast cancer? That's the definition of what I want to figure out, that these researchers wanted to figure out. Then you construct a hypothesis. A hypothesis is an idea of how they can be related. So in other words, too much vitamin D causes breast cancer, or too little vitamin D can cause breast cancer. In this paper, it was vitamin D deficiency or low vitamin D that can be correlated or related to breast cancer, okay? So now that is the hypothesis that they have with this research paper. Then you test the hypothesis and you collect data. So in other words, it says, okay, we're going to take a bunch of people that may have breast cancer, and we're going to check their vitamin D levels, and we're going to see out of all these people, let's say it's 100, what is their vitamin D levels and what is consistent among them. So normal vitamin D levels, according to medicine, the normal levels is anywhere from 35 to 80. So let's say we did the vitamin D levels of 100 women with breast cancer, and they all came out at 20, range from 20 to 25 to 30. So that's interesting data to collect. That's interesting. And then what you do is you analyze that data and you say, is there a consistent pattern of the vitamin D levels related to breast cancer? And then you draw a conclusion, and your conclusion can be there is or there isn't or it needs further investigation. And then you present your results to the scientific community. So the scientific community can look at it and say, this research that this person does is bogus. I'm going to come up with another research plan to prove it. Or I think this is really good, so I'm going to come up with another research plan to actually support this research. And usually at the end of the paper, you'll see bunches of research articles or research papers that are supportive, or that this individual who created this most recent paper has created in support of their research. I know it's a lot of research words. So that's the scientific method. What I want to do now is read an abstract of vitamin D and breast cancer. And let's see here. So this is the abstract, and we're going to read it right the way it says, and then I'm going to interpret it for you. So epidemiologic data have demonstrated that breast cancer incidence is inversely correlated with indices of vitamin D status, including ultraviolet exposure, which enhance epidermal vitamin D synthesis. The vitamin D receptor, or they call it VDR, is expressed in mammary epithelial cells, suggesting that vitamin D may directly influence sensitivity of the gland to transformation. Consistent with this concept, in vitro studies have demonstrated that the VDR ligand 125 dihydroxyvitamin D exerts negative growth regulatory effects on mammary epithelial cells that contribute to maintenance of the differentiated phenotype. Furthermore, the deletion of the VDR gene in mice alters the balance between proliferation and apoptosis in the mammary gland, which ultimately enhances its susceptibility to carcinogenesis. In addition, dietary supplementation with vitamin D or chronic treatment with synthetic VDR agonists reduces the incidence of carcinogenic-induced mammary tumors in rodents. Collectively, these observations have reinforced the need to further define the human requirement for vitamin D and the molecular actions of the VDR in relation to prevention of breast cancer. Okay, that's a mouthful, right? I agree. So let's break it down a little bit. So this experiment, Vitamin D and Prevention of Breast Cancer, by Jolene Walsh, was the researcher, did research with mice and rats and figured out, tried to influence the cancer with vitamin D levels in relation to rats and mice. Now, when they say epidemiological data have demonstrated that breast cancer incidence is inversely correlated with indices of vitamin D status, what they're saying is that the population of women with breast cancer that they look, epidemiological, that's the population, have a lower level of vitamin D in relationship to their breast cancer. So when they have breast cancer, they have lower incidence of vitamin D. That's kind of what that means. And then when they talk about is the vitamin D receptor, VDR, is expressed in mammary epithelial cells, breasts. All right, there is vitamin D receptors in breast tissue. That's very important to know. That's easy to figure out. You dissect breast, there it is. There's the receptors, okay? And what they did was they figured that they would try and see what happens to rats when this receptor was destroyed, basically. And what they discovered is that once that receptor is destroyed, the ability to regulate the epithelial cells, or the cells of the breast tissue, to properly divide and function is altered to the point where they become carcinogenic. Cancer is a aberrant cell growth, right? It's your own cells in your body that mess up, and they start doing weird things. And this paper is saying vitamin D may have a role in regulating that development. That's it. So now if you look, I'll look here, I'm going to tell you how many research papers are cited by this article, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 research papers that are cited in this article that this researcher has read to develop this most recent paper. So that's a lot, right? So that alone, vitamin D and breast cancer may be related. The vitamin D deficiency may be related to breast cancer. And that's a research paper that we just dissected. Now, is this research paper good, bad, indifferent, terrible? I don't know. You would have to learn how to look at the method of the research. And that is given in the body of the research. Now, that costs money to look at this paper. This is under what's called PubMed, PubMed, and you can get it on Google, and you can find abstracts for a bunch of papers. And then what you can do is you can pay to find the full research paper. But I would recommend that you don't do that yet, because you might not know how to read these the procedures that they go through, which are very important to understand. Example being, if they used a caustic chemical that was part of the solution that caused the damage as opposed to the deficiency itself, then that would actually taint the results of the research. So that's a lot. That's all for now. I'm going to do more of these types of analyses of research papers if you'd like, and I'm happy to do that. I think it's important for us to understand these things because we're all responsible for our own health. And I think that's the way we need to go, because we can't really trust anyone else. We need to actually be our own advocates, our own healthcare providers, in a sense. So the more you understand, the healthier you're going to be, and the happier actually I am. So this is Dr. Greg, changing the way we look at health.